Imagine a person learning to build physical strength. After one workout, their appearance remains largely unchanged. After several workouts, the change is still difficult to detect. If they judge the process entirely by immediate evidence, they might conclude nothing is happening. But beneath the surface, adaptation has already begun. The body is responding. The muscles are adjusting. The nervous system is learning. Progress exists even when it is not yet obvious. Identity works the same way. Each time you choose a new assumption, you are training your mind. Each time you interrupt an old pattern, you are strengthening a new one. Each time you respond differently than you once would have, you are reinforcing a different version of yourself. The effects may not be visible immediately, but that does not mean they are absent. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about success, abundance, opportunity, and growth is the belief that these experiences appear randomly. They imagine certain people simply happen to be fortunate. They assume some individuals possess access to invisible advantages unavailable to everyone else. Certainly, life presents different circumstances to different people. Yet beneath those differences lies another factor that often goes unnoticed: expectation. The expectations people carry influence far more than they realize. A person who expects positive outcomes does not move through life the same way as someone expecting disappointment. The difference appears in posture, in communication, in persistence, in attention, in decision-making, in risk tolerance, in emotional recovery, in countless subtle behaviors that accumulate over time. Two people can possess similar abilities and similar opportunities, yet the person expecting possibility often creates dramatically different results. Not because they are guaranteed success, not because life becomes effortless, but because expectation changes engagement, and engagement changes outcomes. How many opportunities are missed simply because someone assumed they would not work? How many conversations never occurred because someone expected rejection? How many goals were abandoned because someone assumed failure? How many possibilities disappeared because someone decided in advance that nothing would change? These assumptions often operate silently. They feel like reality. They feel logical. They feel justified. Yet many of them are simply inherited conclusions that have never been questioned. The moment you begin questioning them, their power starts weakening. You realize that many limitations were accepted rather than proven. You realize that many fears were predictions rather than facts. You realize that many doubts were habits rather than truths. This realization creates freedom, because if a belief was learned, it can be replaced. If an assumption was adopted, it can be changed. If an identity was constructed, it can be reconstructed. Think about the person you become when you genuinely expect things to work out. Not perfectly, not without challenges, but ultimately in your favor. How do you speak? How do you carry yourself? How do you approach uncertainty? How do you handle temporary setbacks? You become more resilient, more patient, more observant, more proactive, more open. These qualities are not magical, they are practical. And practical qualities create practical results. One of the reasons people struggle to adopt empowering assumptions is because they confuse them with fantasy. They assume that expecting good things means ignoring reality. It does not. A person can acknowledge current circumstances while still choosing a different identity. A person can recognize challenges while still believing in possibility. A person can face uncertainty while still expecting growth. The two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the most effective mindset is not blind optimism. It is grounded confidence. Grounded confidence says, I see where I am, but I refuse to believe this is where I must remain. Grounded confidence says, I acknowledge obstacles, but I do not build my identity around them. Grounded confidence says, my current circumstances may describe my situation, but they do not define my potential. This distinction changes everything, because once identity becomes separate from circumstance, growth becomes possible. You stop allowing temporary conditions to dictate permanent conclusions. You stop interpreting every challenge as evidence against yourself. You stop turning setbacks into personal definitions. Instead, you begin viewing experiences as information. Nothing more, nothing less. A setback becomes feedback. A delay becomes preparation. A challenge becomes development. And because the interpretation changes, your emotional response changes. When your emotional response changes, your behavior changes. When your behavior changes consistently, your results begin changing too. Many people spend years attempting to control outcomes while neglecting the one thing they can influence immediately: their inner state. They obsess over external conditions. They worry about timing. They worry about competition. They worry about economic conditions. They worry about what others think. They worry about circumstances beyond their control. Meanwhile, the quality of their attention deteriorates. Their focus weakens. Their confidence declines. Their creativity shrinks. Their energy becomes consumed by resistance. Ironically, this often reduces the very opportunities they are trying to attract, because opportunity tends to favor engagement. Opportunity favors awareness. Opportunity favors action. Opportunity favors presence. When a person becomes trapped in fear, they often become less capable of recognizing possibilities. Not because opportunities disappeared, but because fear narrowed perception. This is one of the most important truths you can understand. Your experience of life is heavily influenced by what your attention is trained to notice. If your attention constantly searches for reasons things will fail, it will find them. If your attention constantly searches for obstacles, it will discover countless obstacles. If your attention constantly searches for evidence of scarcity, scarcity will appear everywhere. But attention can be trained, just as a muscle becomes stronger through repetition. Awareness becomes stronger through practice. You can train yourself to notice possibilities. You can train yourself to recognize opportunities. You can train yourself to focus on solutions. You can train yourself to expect growth. This is not about denying problems. It is about refusing to make problems the center of your identity. There is a significant difference. One approach creates paralysis. The other creates momentum. Momentum is incredibly powerful because it compounds. A small positive action leads to another. A small improvement encourages another. A small success builds confidence for another. Before long, progress that once seemed impossible begins feeling natural. Yet every chain of momentum begins with a decision. The decision to stop identifying with limitations. The decision to stop rehearsing old stories. The decision to stop feeding assumptions that no longer serve your future. Most people underestimate how much energy is consumed maintaining an identity that no longer fits. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day without realizing it. After enough time, the weight feels normal. You stop noticing it. You assume exhaustion is simply part of life. Then one day, the backpack is removed. Suddenly, movement feels easier. Possibilities expand. Energy returns. Many limiting assumptions operate exactly this way. They consume mental and emotional resources without being recognized. The belief that success must be difficult. The belief that opportunities belong to other people. The belief that growth requires constant struggle. The belief that you are somehow behind. The belief that you missed your chance. The belief that circumstances determine potential. These assumptions create invisible resistance. And resistance is exhausting. The moment you release them, energy becomes available for something else. Creation, growth, learning, action, possibility. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is simple. If I already believed in my future, how would I behave today? Not tomorrow, not someday, today. Would you approach your work differently? Would you communicate differently? Would you take better care of yourself? Would you make different decisions? Would you stop delaying important actions? Would you stop seeking endless permission? Would you stop doubting every opportunity? These questions reveal something important. The future version of yourself is often available right now through behavior. You do not have to wait for confidence to begin acting confidently. You do not have to wait for certainty to begin moving forward. You do not have to wait for success to begin thinking like a successful person. The identity can come first, and when it does, circumstances begin responding. This does not mean life becomes effortless. Challenges remain. Unexpected events still occur. Difficult moments still happen. The difference is that you meet those moments from a different state of consciousness. You stop viewing every obstacle as proof that something is wrong. You stop interpreting temporary resistance as permanent failure. You stop abandoning your vision because conditions fluctuate. Instead, you develop stability, and stability creates power. A person with a stable identity is difficult to discourage, not because they never experience doubt, but because doubt no longer controls them. They understand that feelings come and go, circumstances change, results fluctuate, yet identity remains a choice, and that choice influences everything else. There is another aspect of this process that deserves attention: receiving. Many people spend their lives focused on pursuing, achieving, forcing, controlling. They become experts at effort but strangers to receiving. They know how to chase. They do not know how to allow. The irony is that some opportunities require effort while others require openness. Some opportunities arrive because you worked for them. Others arrive because you were available to recognize them. A conversation, an introduction, an unexpected idea, a timely insight, a chance encounter, a solution appearing at the right moment. These experiences often require receptivity rather than force. Yet people who assume life is always a struggle may overlook them entirely. They are too busy pushing to notice what is already arriving. Learning to receive is not passivity. It is awareness. It is trust. It is the ability to remain open while continuing to move forward. The person who develops this balance becomes remarkably effective. They take action when action is needed. They remain open when openness is needed. They stop exhausting themselves trying to control every outcome. Instead, they focus on what they can influence directly: their mindset, their identity, their attention, their actions, their consistency, their assumptions. This creates a sense of ease that others often misunderstand. From the outside, it appears that things simply work out for them. In reality, they have cultivated an internal environment where opportunities can be recognized, pursued, and received. That environment begins with a decision to stop defining yourself by previous limitations, a decision to stop rehearsing old disappointments, a decision to stop carrying assumptions that belong to a former version of yourself, and most importantly, a decision to become familiar with a new identity long before the world confirms it. Because once that identity becomes familiar, everything else begins reorganizing around it, not instantly, not magically, but steadily, naturally, and often far more powerfully than most people ever imagine. The deeper you understand this process, the more clearly you begin seeing that transformation is never truly about changing the world around you first. It is about changing the relationship you have with yourself. And that relationship is built one assumption at a time. The assumptions you reinforce today quietly become the reality you experience tomorrow, which means every moment contains an opportunity to continue repeating an old story, or an opportunity to begin living from a new one. And the difference between those two choices is often far greater than it initially appears. The difference often appears small in the beginning. In fact, if someone were observing your life from the outside, they might not notice any change at all. Your daily routine could look similar. Your responsibilities could remain the same. The people around you might continue behaving exactly as they always have. Yet beneath the surface, a profound shift can be taking place. Because the most important transformations are not always visible. A person does not become stronger the moment they enter a gym. A musician does not become skilled the moment they touch an instrument. A leader does not become influential the moment they decide to grow. There is always a period where the change exists internally before it becomes visible externally. Identity develops this way. The challenge is that most people have been conditioned to trust evidence more than they trust intention. They trust circumstances more than they trust possibility. They trust their history more than they trust their potential. As a result, they often become prisoners of what has already happened. They look backward for proof of what is possible instead of looking forward. They use old experiences as forecasts. Past disappointments become expectations. Past failures become assumptions. Past limitations become identities. Without realizing it, they allow history to shape destiny. Yet history was never designed to determine your future. History provides information, it provides lessons, it provides experience. But it does not have the authority to define what comes next unless you grant it that authority. Think about how often people introduce themselves internally through their limitations. They may never say the words aloud, but the pattern exists. I've always struggled with money. I've never been lucky. Nothing ever works out for me. I'm just not the type of person who succeeds. I'm always behind. People like me don't get opportunities. These statements appear harmless because they feel familiar. Yet every time they are repeated, they reinforce identity. And identity influences behavior. The person who believes they are always behind behaves differently than the person who believes they are progressing. The person who believes opportunities rarely appear behaves differently than the person who expects opportunities. The person who believes growth is possible engages with life differently than the person who believes their future has already been decided. The most powerful stories in your life are not the ones you tell others. They are the ones you tell yourself. Those stories create expectations. Expectations shape attention. Attention influences behavior. Behavior influences results. Results reinforce stories. The cycle continues. This is why changing your story is not a superficial exercise. It is a practical one. Many people think transformation begins with changing actions.